Give me a couple of seconds here. Okay, Lee, do we have a quorum? So it's me, you, Julie.
Yeah, we do, because I think there
Okay.
are only 5 members of
Right.
the.
Okay.
so
All right.
3
Perfect.
quorum.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stephen Vasquez. I'm the chair of the Housing Committee for Community Board 8. Apologize for the little delay. All right, and I apologize for the background noise. All right, so do a quick roll call. So myself, Stephen Vasquez, Lee Chong.
Chong here.
Okay, Julie Reyes.
Here.
Ingrid De Leon. All right, and Ted Morris. No. Okay, move on to the next order of business, approval of committee minutes, April 25th of 2022 and October 24th of 2022, which was our last month's meeting. So I apologize with the whole mix up with the meetings from last month. Going forward, if I'm the one taking minutes or if anyone is, responsible for taking minutes, we'll just send it out to the committee members, look it over, make any edits and adjustments, and then send it to the board. So my apologies for that, jumping ahead. So that is that. So any issues with the minutes from the previous month or in April, Lee?
Well, I can't vote on the April because I wasn't on the board, but are we gonna go with the ones that I drafted, that I shortened? Are we gonna review that? Do you think maybe we do that afterwards, after our guest speaker?
We could, yeah, we absolutely could.
Or for that, I don't think they really want to hear about our Monday.
Absolutely. Yeah, we could.
Discussion.
Same thing with the chairperson's report. We'll leave all that after Mr. Jenkins presents.
Yes.
So Mr. Jenkins, we have Marquise Jenkins, right? It's Marquise Jenkins, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right. Good evening, Marquise Jenkins, the co-founder of the Residents to Preserve Public Housing, right? And the topic of discussion of this evening would be the NYCHA's Preservation Trust, right? Okay, all right. So without further ado, you have the floor, right?
Stephen, can I
Yep.
ask one thing?
Yeah,
We have
sure.
a lot of guests that we're not, we're not on the committee, and maybe they should be introduced. We have people
Okay.
that, I think they would like to be, they should be recognized. So they
Sure,
can
of
put in the
course.
minutes that,
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
attendees. So are they guests of yours, Mr. Jenkins?
I do not believe I have any guests with me today.
Oh, all right. So these are people from the community who found out about this meeting. And perhaps,
Excellent.
right?
Well,
Stephen is smiling, so that she must have found out. So maybe perhaps they could introduce themselves. And also, I see someone from HPD who's here too. Who doesn't like to show her face anymore.
No,
All right,
there's
so-
no face showing, but this is Winifred Campbell. I am the Deputy Director of HPD's Bronx Planning Office.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Campbell.
You're welcome.
My name is Araceli Farcia. I am the family engagement for the Kingsbridge area from the organization of Literacy Inc. or Link, better known here in the community. And also a resident.
All right, we have a GILESA 01.
My name is Doreen Giles. I'm the property manager of Marble Hill Houses.
Okay,
I'm Jose Hernandez, Superintendent of Marble Hill Houses.
Hi, my name is Muslima. I'm the Vice President of Marble Hill Resident Council.
right. And then I believe we have David Gelman, right?
He's not talking tonight.
Hi there.
Hi, David.
I'm a member of the Community Board 8, a budget chair, but I was also a member of the Housing Committee years ago. So I'm particularly interested in Mr. Jenkins' topic.
All right, excellent. All right, so I think everybody went around and introduced themselves in the committee and the board. All right, so Mr. Jenkins.
So again, my name is Marquise Jenkins, and before I start, I just want to thank you all for inviting me here to talk about the important work and responsibility that we all have to save one of the most valuable resources in our community, and that is public housing, one of the most truly affordable sources of housing for so many, for close to 500,000 residents in New York City live in public housing. And what we have seen over the years is a steady decline in funding from all levels of our government. And what that has, what the impact of not receiving the funding means that our homes are in complete disrepair. Some obviously worse than others, but people are literally dying in their homes. And as we saw through COVID-19, public housing residents were hit twice as hard by COVID-19. Today, the New York City Housing Authority estimates that we have a $40 billion deficit. And so what that means, again, that repairs are not being done, services are not being provided, but also our housing authority is not being held accountable to use its resources more wisely. So what has the city, the state, the federal government, and the housing authority been doing to address this crisis in public housing? And coming all the way down from the federal government under HUD, Housing and Urban Development, there is a push to convert our public housing from Section 9, public housing as we know it, to Section 8, project-based Section 8. And that conversion process is happening essentially through two programs. You may be familiar with the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, RAD, and here in New York City, we call it PAC, Permanent Affordability Commitment Together. And in that program, what the Housing Authority is doing is they're taking our public housing developments and handing them over to private developers to manage and operate. Again, in that process and handing them over, these units are being converted into Section 8. During the Obama administration, HUD gave our New York City Housing Authority permission to convert 62,000 units over under the RAD, giving them over to private developers and converting them to Section 8. As we have seen through all of the Section 8 conversions, there have been challenges and there have been different iterations of the programs, different iterations because with every new conversion, the Housing Authority has learned something new in terms of the challenges that residents face when they go into conversions. Example, Ocean Bay Houses was the first public housing, the first development that was converted under the RAD program. And what we've seen there, and you can find this in documented articles, is we've seen an influx or an increase of evictions in that development. We also question the quality of the work. Yes, the grounds of Ocean Bay looks beautiful, but were they able to address the roofing issues, the electricity, and the piping? What role do residents play in negotiating which contractor or which private developer was going to come in and take over that development? And after learning all of those issues that exist, we brought in a new chairman, Gregory Ross. And in 2018, Gregory Ross came up with a new plan that was in many ways similar to the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, but different in one critical way. It was different in that we were taking units and not giving them to private developers, but we were essentially giving the New York City Housing Authority the ability to do what private developers can do, which is twofold. A, they were able to convert these units from Section 9 public housing to Section 8, and B, they were able to take out loans. and use the property as collateral to be able to take on loans from private investors. The Public Housing Preservation Trust was first introduced in 2018, and in this year, in July, our governor signed the legislation into law. What the law essentially says is that the housing authority can move, or not that they can move, but the law says that the Public Housing Preservation Trust will only have the capacity to take on 25,000 units. Now, of course, the legislators can determine if they want to increase or decrease that size, but right now the law provides for them to be able to take on 25,000 units. The reason why I pause is because just because the law was the Public Housing Preservation Trust was created by law, it doesn't mean that the housing authority automatically gets to move units in to that entity. They also need HUD's approval and sign off from the mayor. And in doing that, the housing authority must complete what is called a Section 18 application, which is meant for either demolishing the units or dispossessing, in this case, dispossessing, giving them over to a new entity, the Public Housing Preservation Trust. It also meant that the Public Housing Preservation Trust can take up to $10 billion in private debt. And it also included what they're calling an opt-in feature. So in other words, residents will have the ability to vote on if their development is going to go into the Public Housing Preservation. So where is the trust at today? So today, the last action that have taken place on the trust was figuring out what the voting protocol was going to be. So if residents have the ability to vote on if they want to go into the trust, what does that voting process look like? What information will be given to residents before they vote? What is the quorum? How many residents will need to participate in order for that vote to be considered valid? And what are the options in terms of what residents are voting for? So the law states, the law basically gave the New York City Housing Authority to determine all of those things. But what the law also mandated was that the Housing Authority must produce a draft by October, and residents will have up 60 days to review this draft and give comments. The comment section ended on November 23rd. And so now in the final stages of the voting process is that the Housing Authority must issue their final voting regulations on December 16th. So the idea is that they take all the comments that they've gotten from residents, elected officials, and the general public and use that to inform what their final rules and regulations, what the final voting regulations are going to be. Some of the things that were proposed in the draft that we were against, and also 4 recommendations that we, the residents to preserve public housing, have demanded through the voting process was 1, that residents, that the majority of residents must participate in this vote. The Housing Authority said in their draft proposal, proposing that only 10% of residents at a development must participate in the voting process. And of course, we think that is simply not enough. Here's an example. If you have a development with 100 residents, there are 3 choices on the ballot. So the choice is public housing, Section 9, which they call status quo, RAD PAC, or the Public Housing Preservation Trust. So you have 3 items on the ballot. You have 100 residents in your development. 10% of those 100 residents is what? That means 10 residents only need to vote, right? Out of 100, only 10 residents need to vote. And of those 10 residents with 3 choices on the ballot, that means 4 residents will have the ability to determine what type of housing residents, 100 residents will live under. And so we're saying for a decision this big, the decision that will require residents to change their lease, a decision that will put residents at risk because they'll be borrowing money without any government protection, the majority of residents should be determining if the development is going to stay as it is, if it's going to go into the Radin Park, or if it's going to become a part of the Public Housing Preservation Trust. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that residents had all the information that they needed before they made the vote, which will include a physical needs assessment, right? Residents should have a clear understanding of all the issues that exist at their development, from the rooftop all the way down to the grass. And moving further, in addition to understanding all of the issues that exist, residents should have a firm understanding of what it will cost to fix all of those things that need repair. Taking it even further, residents should understand how much of that subsidy, the Section 8 subsidy, is going to go towards making those repairs. And if the Section 8 subsidy is not enough, how much will the Public Housing Preservation Trust or RADPAC will need to borrow in order to cover all of the expenses to make all of the repairs that are needed. The third thing that we are advocating for is, because all of this information is very dense, very technical, residents should be able to bring on an independent advisor to help navigate through all of this information. And then finally, to be quite frank, to be quite honest, we don't trust the Public Housing Authority. We are at this place, we are at this deficit, not simply because the Housing Authority didn't get the money that they needed, but there's a lot of mismanagement and outright corruption that took place in public housing from past administrations going back decades. And so we wanted to make sure, right, since the Public Housing Authority has a vested interest in getting people to vote for this trust, that they were not involved with the voting process. So an independent third party should come in and conduct these elections and make sure that they maintain the integrity of the elections without any influence from the New York City Housing Authority. To be fair and to be clear, the residents to preserve public housing have always been against the Public Housing Preservation Trust. The reasons that we have been against the Public Housing Preservation Trust is, one, the residents were not involved in the creation. There are a set of federal rules called 24 CFR 964 that states residents must be involved from conception. And that didn't happen. In fact, the Housing Authority created this plan while we were under attack from COVID. And as I mentioned, we were hit hard. And so our Senate Association and resident leaders were battling and fighting this. Our chairman was pushing this Public Housing Preservation Trust. So residents never fully had the opportunity to understand, learn, and participate in the creation of this trust. Secondly, the borrowing of money. The law allows the Housing Authority to borrow up to $10 billion using our homes as collateral. If you go to a bank and you say, bank, my roof is caving in, the bank says, well, I'm not going to just give you money. What do you have as collateral? Because I need to make sure I get my money back, right? And you say, well, I have nothing but this house. And then you use your house as collateral. The bank gives you the loan, you make the payments, you make the payments, you make the payments, and then sadly, you lose your job. You lose your job, you're not able to pay the loan back. Well, what happens to your property? It goes into foreclosure. So the same is true here. $10 billion, we have seen the Housing Authority mismanage funding all of the time. So what happens if we do not get the Section 8 subsidy from the federal government? Or what happens if the Housing Authority mismanages the funding and we're not able to pay those $10 billion back? We believe that if the state was so convinced that this is a good plan, that the state and the city should step up and back these loans in the event of a default, and they have not done so. Finally, we believe in the mission and the goal of Public Housing Section 9. We believe that public housing is a good program, is a great program if it is funded and supported in the way that it needs to be. Right now, there is a push to convert all of our public housing from Section 9 to Section 8. When the Public Housing Preservation Trust was first introduced, it was introduced as the blueprint for change. And in that proposal, they were proposing to convert not just 25,000 units, they were proposing 110,000 units. We believe that that is still the goal and that they want to do it piece by piece. And if they are successful, there will be no more public housing in New York City. So for all of those reasons, we have been fighting and advocating to stop the full implementation of the Public Housing Preservation Trust, while also lobbying our city, state, and federal government for adequate funding for public housing. The last thing I'll mention is that while we have a $40 billion deficit, through our efforts, we were able to convince the state government to give us $350 million. Now, that was just a small percentage of public housing residents who were fighting relentlessly. We believe, or we don't believe in the hype in that the government doesn't have the funding to fund public housing. We've seen what the state government has done in terms of funding a football stadium to which there are only 4 games a season, right? So we know that the government has the funding. And so we believe that it's just a matter of political will. And so we have been using our advocacy and our organizing towards pushing and demanding the political will to adequately fund public housing. And we're going to continue to do that. So while we got $350 million this year, we are still going back to Albany in January to push for the full amount of funding that we need for public housing. So I'll stop there. I know that was a mouthful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jenkins. I just have a quick question. So you had stated that these developments, right, could take out loans, right? Has there been any developments that have defaulted on any of these loans in the city of New York?
The law, so 2 things. The law for the Public Housing Preservation Trust, no units have been moved into the trust as of yet. So there's been no loans taken out. In terms of the RAD PAC, we don't have any knowledge, or we don't know how much money these private developers are borrowing on the public housing. So we simply don't have that data, and that's something that we're also demanding. But that's also something that's not immediate, right? Like it is something that may play out 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road after the fact, because if they're taking out loans, they're only now taking out loans. I think RAD and PAC was first implemented in 2016. And which means that the first conversion probably didn't start taking place until 2017, 2018. So it hasn't been long enough to see if they are spending that money wisely and what is their track record for paying those dollars back. But for the trust, it just hasn't been implemented yet.
Lee Chan, you have your hand up?
Yes, I wanted to ask Mr. Jenkins, thank you very much for your very illuminating history of the RAD and NYCHA and the current program. In the old days, there are city public housing and state public housing. Under Pataki, a Republican, he decided he wasn't going to fund any of the state public housing, which then it meant that the city had to use its money, which it got from the federal government, to maintain these. Do you know if that has changed since Cuomo came into office and currently with Hochul?
It has. In fact, you are actually speaking about the first ever conversion plan that took place. That
No,
was a-
generic. I'll give you an example. Manhattanville Public Housing in Harlem is a state-funded, operated public housing. Under
Mhm.
Pataki, he defunded it. No more money came to the city to maintain it, correct? So that meant the
There-
money, right? I was just curious, is the
There
state,
were there were 21 city and state developments total. Daniel Squadron led the efforts on a campaign called the Sound Campaign, Save Our Underfunded NYCHA Developments. And in that campaign, they decided to partner with Citibank, right? And under Citibank, they converted those 21, or the majority of those 21 developments, into Section 8 and was able to receive federal funding for those developments. So you will, many of those, that's why I said those were like the first Section 8 conversions, because the model kind of came from what they did to those 21 city and state developments. So those developments receive funding now. It's not clear exactly what their state is in terms of their finances.
okay, and may I ask another question, a follow-up?
Sure.
NYCHA also had a program, I don't know if it exists any longer, where they allow private developers to build housing on underutilized NYCHA land, for instance, like the gardens and parking lots, right? Like I recall Fulton Houses, I think was one of the first ones that was done that way. Does that program still exist too?
Yes, it's called NYCHA Infield. It was part of NYCHA's 2.0 plan. There's been a lot of controversy, so they haven't been moving it as aggressively as they would hope to. But those plans are still on the table. In fact, there was just an article, that highlighted a sale at Manhattanville. NYCHA had sold some of its property to some private developers, basically for pennies on the dollar. So NYCHA is still selling its land, and in addition to its land, it's also selling its air rights. You might be familiar with air rights because the first time they started going after air rights, they were targeting churches. And basically, for those of you who may not understand what air rights are, is if you had applied to build a building 14 feet tall and you stopped at 7 feet and didn't use the full 14, you still have 7 feet of air rights that you didn't use. And you can sell those air rights to another private developer. And at that time, private developers were buying it from here, there, and elsewhere, and they were stacking them all up in one place. So NYCHA is, again, selling is open space or underutilized space, as well as their air rights.
Thank you.
Just have one more question here. You had mentioned an independent advisor. Is that for voting, or is that for the whole voting process, or is that for just checking on necessary repairs?
Right now, that's just for the voting process. So if we want to make sure that residents have someone who can walk them through, break down all the information that they're receiving to help them determine if going RAD PAC or trust or staying in Section 9 is the best option for them.
All right. I see David Gelman's hand up.
Yes, quick question. Mr. Jenkins, you've made numerous references to Section 9 converting into Section 8. What are the two differences? What are the two? What are the differences? What is the process of conversion?
Sure, there's some very distinct differences in both of these programs but at the basic level, it's two different funding streams, right? Section 8 as a whole, whether it's project-based or voucher-based, was created as a tool to be able to, basically, this is a very biased statement, I'll be honest about it, but it was a program that was created to filter money into the private sector. When public housing was first built, public housing was the model, not just the model for affordable housing, but the model for housing overall. It was the answer to slum living and tenement buildings, right? So people who lived in the private market were looking at public housing as, you know, they wanted to live in this better housing. And so that created a clash between government housing and the private market. And so the private market started their lobbying, and through that lobbying effort, they created Section 8. And that basically allowed the private market to tap into the housing dollars that the government was allocating. There are some distinct differences. One of the things I always tell people when I'm doing these presentations is that we're not simply advocating for the bricks and mortar. We are advocating for the Section 9 program. Public housing has a set of rules called the 964 rules and regulations. They are unique to public housing residents. They give residents the right to organize, the right to space to be able to organize, the right to funding to be able to support that organizing, secession rights, the rights to a hearing before their cases go to court. There are the rights for residents to be able to take over full management of their development called the Resident Management Corporation. These rights do not exist under Section 8. But one of the bigger things that residents also need to pay attention to is income. As a public housing resident, when your income goes up, you still pay only 30% of your income max. You do not get pushed out. You do not go above 30% of your income, whatever your income is. With Section 8, there is a cap. If your overall household income reaches that cap, your family no longer qualifies for the Section 8 subsidy. So you are forced to either A, move out of the unit, or B, pay the fair market value of that unit.
So is Section 9 government-owned and operated NYCHA housing, for example, versus Section 8 being vouchers that one takes to commercial landlords?
Yes and no. It's also important, right, that NYCHA operates a lot of Section 8 developments and oversees and administers Section 8 vouchers. So that program has been expanded. So it's not just the private market that is tapping into Section 8, but it was created to give the private market access.
Can I just enhance? I think what David wants to know, the answer is Section 9 is a section in the public, what is it called? The U.S. Housing Act of 1937 that allowed for the creation of public housing.
Right.
That's right?
That's correct.
Right. So that's the simple answer to your question. And the
Yeah,
other,
the private sector doesn't get to build public housing and make profits off of public housing, but they can take government funding to support their private efforts in the private sector.
let me ask you, Mr. Jenkins, is enhanced sticky vouchers and enhanced Section 8 going to be allowed when people's incomes exceed the 30% of income? Or no?
So the only thing I can say is that there's no language in either RAD PAC or the trust that would guarantee that.
So people will be evicted.
People will be evicted if their income exceeds, and we've seen mass evictions, and the reason, one of the main reasons, there were two reasons why we've seen mass evictions. One, families no longer qualify for the Section 8. Families don't qualify for the Section 8 income because their overall household income is too high. Second, when public housing residents are, when the housing authority brings charges to a public housing resident for eviction before they go to housing court, they are guaranteed an administrative hearing. And usually 90 to 95% of those cases are addressed, right? And as if not, if I'm wrong on this, not just staff, please correct me, but the bulk of those cases are addressed in the administrative hearing. So many of the residents actually don't make it to housing court because those things are dealt with. In the RAD building, right, you lose that right to an administrative hearing. And so residents are automatically taken straight to court, and the eviction process is a lot quicker. And so that's why we saw an influx of evictions at Ocean Bay Houses, for example.
Okay. Any other questions? Yep. Yes, Julie.
Hi, I'm sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand on this phone. First, Mr. Jenkins, thank you so much for all this information. I don't know if I missed it, but when or have they already had the vote? When are they having the vote on the choices, with the 3 choices?
Sure. So the way that it will work is that first, the housing authority would now have to issue their final voting regulations, which will be on December 16th. By state law, they have to have the final voting regulations on December 16th. The next stage, and this probably won't happen until next year, the housing authority will have to approach a development or approach multiple developments. Each development will have a separate voting process. So let's say NYCHA decides I want the first development that I go to be Marble Hill. The housing authority will go to the residents, and they will have about 100 days. 100 days providing education and holding community meetings with residents. The law says they must conduct at least 4 meetings at that development. After those 100 days and after 4 meetings have been conducted, then there is an election that takes place. I mean, a voting that takes place. That voting process will last for 23 days. The first 11 days, you will have access, the ability to vote in 3 different ways. You will be able to vote via mail, via online, and in person. And for the last 11 and 12, for the last 12 days, it would only be in-person voting. But these are all drafts until we see the final, which is supposed to come out on December 16th. What we are doing as a plan B, and let me pause and see if I answer your question before I add information. Does that?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay. So if we are not satisfied, and we probably won't be satisfied with NYCHA's final version, what we are then doing and are preparing to do is to go to our state legislators and issue out the 4 demands that I laid out in the hopes that they would make amendments to the law, right? And if they make amendments to the Public Housing Preservation Trust law, then NYCHA will have to follow those amendments. So if we don't get them from NYCHA, then we are aiming to get them from the state legislature.
Mr. Jenkins,
you,
quick
Tom.
question. So in regards to this NYCHA Preservation Trust, right? Are you aware of any other urban cities in the US that have something similar?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. The conversion from Section 9 to Section 8 is a national concern. RAD is a federal program, right, that was created by HUD. So housing authorities all across the city have entered into RAD programs. In fact, Gregory Ross, our chairman, have led those efforts in 5 other cities, including his hometown of Minneapolis. So we are losing, there were hundreds of thousands of public housing units all across the country, and through different programs, we are losing public housing. The first program you might remember as Hope 6. And under Hope 6, I believe that came under President Bill Clinton. And that was under that effort, it was an effort to deconcentrate poverty. And following that, we've lost a lot of units in New Orleans, for example, for Hurricane, what was that hurricane that happened?
Katrina?
Yes,
Katrina.
Katrina. Those public housing developments were in perfect condition, and yet they were torn down and replaced with less dense housing. Puerto Rico, before New York was the largest public housing authority in the public housing authority, Puerto Rico was actually larger than New York City. They have converted all of their units under the RAD program in Puerto Rico. So there's no more public housing in Puerto Rico. So it is happening all across the country, and our fight is a federal fight, because the bulk of our funding for public housing comes from the federal government. And the federal government just simply doesn't want to fund public housing anymore.
Gotcha. So your concern that's occurring in Ocean Bay, correct? Right?
I'm sorry, say that again.
So Ocean Bay, right, was where the influx of evictions was occurring? You
That's
stated
where
earlier?
it started. That's where it started. The other resource that you should check out is, and I might be able to pull it up, but the Human Rights Watch issued out a report just detailing how bad the RAD program has been operating since its implementation.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions for Mr. Jenkins? No. So just one last question from me. As a community board, right, what is it that I guess we could do to sort of like, help mitigate this issue, right? To help, housing be affordable and to prevent these evictions that you're mentioning?
Sure, thank you. I appreciate this question wholeheartedly, because I think there is a lot of support that we need and can get from community boards all across the city. Fight number one is to secure the adequate funding that we need from our government on all three levels. In the city, our mayor, right, in his last budget, allocated $1.5 billion to the RAD Impact developments. Insulting, right? Because the whole purpose of RAD Impact was to bring in private developers so that they can use their business skills to bring in the dollars that's needed to rehab those developments. So why are we throwing more government funding at them, as opposed to now saying these developments are off the books, let's throw that money to public housing? So lobbying our city to throw at least $1 to $2 billion to public housing every year would go a significant way in saving public housing. As I mentioned earlier, the NYCHA says they have a $40 billion deficit. The blueprint, the Public Housing Preservation Trust Plan is a 10-year plan. So what's 40 billion divided by 10? That's $4 billion. If we can, I'm positive that if we can get the political will, it would be no problem to get $4 billion from our government on the city, state, and federal government every year. And within 10 years, we will eliminate that $40 billion deficit. Second is oversight. Reaching out, for example, to the comptroller and making sure that the comptroller is doing their job and doing an annual audit of the Housing Authority to make sure that it is spending its money wisely. We have seen, for example, when it comes to elevators, one of the major issues was elevator breakdowns. Well, little did we know was that those elevators had warranties on them. And so rather than calling up the companies to have them repair these elevators, NYCHA started touching those elevators and nullified the warranty. And what that meant was that now we were spending millions to $1 billion on purchasing new elevators for developments. So NYCHA is not spending their money wisely. NYCHA needs a watchdog to watch their dog wisely. Third, helping residents advocate for resident management corporations. If there's anyone who has a vested interest and who's going to do all that they can to save public housing, it's going to be residents. There is an example in New Orleans where a public housing resident took over full management of her development. You also have examples here. You might be familiar with the TIL program. I know it's not the best program, but that is a program in which the government supported residents were taking over full management and turning their homes into, and turning their buildings into cooperatives, resident ran cooperative. We have a lot of experts, smart people, and well-resourced people who live in public housing who will do a better job than our current housing authority in managing public housing. We simply need to advocate for them to have the resources and the access to be able to do that.
David Gelman, your hand is up. Muslima, I know your hand was up prior, but David Gelman is a member of the board.
Yeah, just another clarification of terms. Mr. Jenkins, when you say that there's a $40 billion deficit, I think what you're referring to is a $40 billion capital funding shortfall over the long term. In other words, to reconstruct things. That's not an annual operating deficit, correct?
So I use NYCHA language strategically so that we can combat the things that NYCHA are saying, right? If at the very least, if we're using NYCHA's language, then we're on the same page and saying these are the ways that we need to address it. But there is, right? Like the things that pay for ongoing repairs, that comes out of the operating budget, not the capital budget. So the capital budget covers repairs of the roofs. It covers.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is you're saying there's a $40 billion deficit, and I think that that's a capital shortfall. I do not believe that the annual operating deficit is anywhere near $40 billion.
This is language. I'm using this language directly from the housing authority. In terms of a operating deficit, NYCHA saying that they're also saying, and you can find this in NYCHA's annual plan, their 2021 draft agency plan is more of a $300 million deficit on the operating front.
That's what I thought. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to minimize the $40 billion shortfall in capital issues. That's a very, very serious issue. But we do need to differentiate from the $300 million annual operating deficit. And that's ongoing because I have spoken with people from NYCHA, and that there is an issue about covering the operating budgets. But thank you for the clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Lee Chung.
I have a question for Mr. Jenkins regarding your discussion about the self-management by the residents, which I approve of. I used to live in an HDFC in the Bronx, so I know all about the TIL program. In any case, a long time ago, and you can tell me if it still exists, a lot of the NYCHA buildings developments have councils like Marble Hill, and they all used to meet at CSS. And they were very active in trying to lobby NYCHA for issues, you know, concerning repairs, security, and things like that. Does that still exist? Because I haven't been involved for a long time. And are they still going to CSS on monthly meetings?
CSS, we've actually been at odds with CSS.
Never mind.
CSS and Legal Aid have come out in favor of the Public Housing Preservation
Oh.
Trust. But to your
Mr.
question,
Bach is in favor of this?
yes, Victor Bach is in favor of this. He's also retiring too. He has a meeting coming up tomorrow, actually. There's a meeting, and so they're going to be talking about the Public Housing Preservation Trust. They partnered up with the Legal Aid Society, Judith Goldner and Lucy Newman. Those are what we're talking about, right? The 964 rules and regulation give residents, public housing residents, the right to form tenant associations. So every development has the ability to form, or the potential to form, a public house, a resident council. They're also able to concentrate their power, because in addition to every single development having a resident council, all of those developments are broken up into 9 districts, and each district has its own representative body. And those 9 districts come together and they form the citywide Council of Presidents, which is being led by Daniel Barbara. And Daniel Barbara representing every single public housing unit in the city. Him and his board issued out a formal statement objecting to the Public Housing Preservation Trust, and they were ignored.
Okay, all right. Muslima?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to know with the talks about the mismanagement, I know that you were speaking about that with NYCHA in the past. Are there any talks about in the RAD Pack and this Preservation Trust and Blueprint for Change, like how they're gonna like organize managing the money that they do get, you know, under these programs, like how they're gonna move forward with managing the money to be able to address any of the the repairs or things that need to be done in the development in the units.
So that in the sense in which I think that your question gets to. So what you will see in all of these plans is a loose budget that describes all of the areas that needs funding, what it would cost to repair those issues. So like lead abatement, mold, pest, elevators, new enhancements in the bathroom, and like stoves and kitchens, all of those things. There is a breakdown of what it will cost for all of those areas, but an actual budget for that is not clear. Those are all estimates, and there is absolutely no mention of how NYCHA is going to control for mismanagement or misuse of funds. And right, it's like asking someone who has been doing a bad job to monitor themselves. What we need and what we've been asking for is an independent party to look over those numbers, to look at their spending. And in this particular case, the New York City Comptroller has the ability to do that.
And I also just wanted to know, because I know that you were speaking about getting with your advocacy group, as you guys are advocating for residents under the public housing, with the getting the funding from the state and federal level. Have there been any talks with Mayor Adams about trying to get funding for NYCHA? Because I know like there's other stuff that's going on with that they're talking about budget cuts and all these things that he's planning on doing. So with NYCHA, how is that? Where do they fall? If you get what I'm trying to say.
Sure. So again, the mayor in his last budget, they didn't give Section 9 public housing any funding. There were some project initiatives that were launched, but there was no direct funding from the city given to public housing. We asked the city for the same amount of money that we asked for the state. There was 2.8 billion a year for capital and 3.4 billion a year. Excuse me, I said that wrong. So 2.8 billion for operated and 3.4 for capital. And we have a full breakdown of where we believe those dollars should go. We're right now we are preparing a campaign to go after the state. And that's only because at this very moment, our governor is putting together her budget proposal for the state. And the legislative and budgeting season will start for the state in January. There is somewhat of an overlap with the city's budget process. And at some point, we will go after the city and schedule meetings. But right now, we're preparing to go after the state.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions, comments for Mr. Jenkins in regards to his presentation? No? All right. So I guess that concludes that presentation from Mr. Jenkins. Again, thank you very much for the very detailed presentation. All right. I think you've definitely brought to light a lot of serious issues in regards to NYCHA. And, you know, hope to continue to establish a dialogue with you, you know, and your agency.
Absolutely. You know how to find me. I look forward to working in partnership with you all. And again, thank you so much. I know that you have a lot on your plate as a community board. So to make space to talk about this important issue, and your gratitude. And I thank you so much for this opportunity to share this information with you all.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So everybody else on this call, we're essentially going to go to sort of like more administrative things in regards to the community board. You're more than welcome to stay, or, you know, you could log off if you want as well.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to another meeting, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. What's next? We are going to the minutes, right?
Yeah, we were talking about the minutes.
All right, so we have April 25th and October 24th. So just a quick glance over the minutes that you had sent, Lee. Are they, I don't think they incorporated Julie's edits, right? That she did on Google Docs?
I don't know. I think what I did was I copied yours and made comments on that one. So I don't know. Julie, did I incorporate any of your changes?
I don't think so. I mean, Julie did very, very detailed changes, which again, like I said, are definitely great. I appreciate the help. But
Julie?
yeah, I don't think. Julie.
Julie?
There we go. Yep, we hear you.
Okay. Unfortunately, I've been on the road. I wasn't able to take a look at it to see, to compare, to see if the.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm looking at them now side by side, and no, they're essentially two different ones. Yeah.
We could table the October to merge them for the
Okay.
next meeting.
Perfect. All right.
Maybe we can send both of them side by side, so we, you know, all the members, including the ones that aren't here.
Okay. Excellent. Sounds good. Okay, so should we table the 25th and the 24th, or can we approve the 25th and table the 24th?
Well, only you and Julie can vote on that one because I wasn't on the board, right?
Okay.
You would need.
Well, you can actually still vote on it, but I would say let's let's do the minutes for the 25th for April.
Do the minutes for April 25th now?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All right, so vote to approve the minutes for April 25th.
Second.
All right. So given that, so are you abstaining, Lee, or?
I'm abstaining because
Right, okay. Okay, all right.
was I even there? I don't recollect.
No, you weren't, because you came like, sort of like the ending of summer, right?
Yeah.
I don't
I
remember.
believe it.
No, I was attending
Yeah.
as a community resident. I'm trying to remember if I attended that one. I don't
You can-
recollect the minutes. I don't recollect the minutes. That's why.
Okay. What are you
Well,
saying, Julie?
You can check with Marty for the law, but I believe even though you weren't a member, even if you're not at the meeting, I believe you could still vote because you're presenting the minutes, but you can check on that for the future.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so I guess let's table both then until we get whether or not you could vote,
All right.
and then we'll go and vote on both again. And then for the October 24th, we'll have both versions side by side, and we'll approve and make whatever changes need to get made on either one.
Okay.
All right. So in regards to our December meeting, that's going to be canceled because it falls on the 26th, which is a Monday, the day after Christmas. The office is closed. And I believe it's also on the tail end of Hanukkah as well. So our next meeting is scheduled for January 23rd at 7 p.m. Now, again, the extension for the mayor's executive order for Zoom is only good through December 21st. So who knows, coming January 23rd, whether that meeting is going to be in person or through Zoom.
Or there's a snowstorm.
Right, or there's a snowstorm in January. Yeah. Okay. So in regards to the chairperson's report, I don't really have much to report on the previous month. Other than maybe two topics that I guess I wanted to address that may be new business / old business. So I know in the previous meeting, we had addressed looking at the resource guide and whatnot. And I think that's, I guess, I want to put a little more emphasis on now, especially considering the issue that, we had ran into trying to schedule a meeting with a rep from the mayor's office in regards for the mayor's office for tenant protection. Apparently, the office couldn't reach anyone from that agency, from that office. And even a rep from the city council member's office didn't even know that specific extension of the mayor's office existed. So I just went to the resource guide real quick. I started, trying to see if the hyperlinks for the subheadings were still active. And unfortunately, there was a handful that I came across that no longer direct you to the site that it's supposed to direct you, or directs you completely into like a generic like HUD website instead of the exact subheading that you're supposed to get sent to. So that's something that we could also look into for the next upcoming meeting. Lee, Julie, you have any comments on that?
No.
Yes,
No. Yep.
I do. In regards to the resource guide,
Mhm.
since we're gonna have some time before our next meeting, maybe if we each took a couple of pages and just, on our leisure, just double check the numbers and links or whatever on our own.
Yep.
And then
Yeah,
we could just
absolutely.
report back. Do
Absolutely.
you know how many
we could.
pages in the resource guide?
I think it's 33, if I'm not mistaken, to be exact. Yeah, 30. 33. 33, and it's probably about 12 that have like links to various sites and programs that we could just, look through.
So if you could just like assign us each like a certain pages.
Yeah. Yep.
We could each take like 4 or 5 pages, and then
Yeah.
we have at least 2 months to work on.
Sounds good. I'll send out an email later tonight or tomorrow morning in regards to that. So another topic, Laura had sent me an email of an article from the Daily News in regards to retrofitting. Specifically addresses local law 97, which is part of the Climate Mobilization Act of 2019. It essentially states that our emissions must be cut by 60% by 2035. If buildings don't, they'll apparently face fines of up to $150,000 per year. Obviously, a huge concern for shareholders as well and co-ops, right? Because these kinds of expenses are usually absorbed by the shareholders through annual maintenance cost increases. So essentially the buildings are, faced with 2 choices. You either do the upgrade and replace, whatever heating system the building has, or, absorb those fines. And then one of the questions that the article raised was, does New York City even have the capacity or infrastructure to support, residential buildings to convert to, other forms of retrofitting. So we have that. Address the resource guide, and then again going back to old business with the previous meeting with AMI. I know there was an article, Lee, you had sent from the Riverdale Press, right? Stated that the median income in the 2 zip codes, 10463 and 10471, was $87,212. Where more than 25% make only 25,000, right? If I read that correctly.
I don't remember.
$25,000, and 15% make anywhere between 100,000 to 200,000, which essentially squeezes the bottom and the middle, right, with an inflated AMI. So for January, we could look to possibly have a guest speaker to address the concerns of the AMI, of how it's calculated.
Even it's calculated by HUD every year on an annual basis.
Right.
But the issue with that, using the AMI, the only time you must use the AMI is if there's federal dollars involved, which is why Mr. Jenkins was saying they had to go by the AMI of, with NYCHA. However, if there's no federal dollars involved in the funding, if it's state or private, and they're building quote unquote affordable housing, and they say they're going to use the AMI, we could put the screws to them and tell them they don't have to use the AMI. Now, this only can happen if it comes before the community board as either a UDAP or a ULURP. Otherwise, if they're doing it as a right, the only, issue we would have is the political issue and getting the politicians involved to change the developers' definition of affordability.
Right. Okay.
And Winnie can confirm, am I correct, Winnie, that you don't have to use AMI if there's no federal dollars? Winnie,
I think she's muted.
I know she's muted, but she can hear us. Never mind. I was going to ask if she wanted to say something because she's still on and she's representing HPD. but I guess not. All right, moving along.
And just before you move along, in regards
Yep.
to the zip code, I'm not sure if they mentioned, the community board has parts of zip code 10468 as well.
Okay.
Okay.
All
See,
right.
that's why I wanted city planning to get involved, because city planning tracks income based on census tracts, or they used to. And that's what I was wondering, if we had a city planning liaison to Community Board 8 who could give us that information. I think you mentioned that the equity, the committee had done some sort of information like that. I tried to understand what they did. I think Julie sent something to us.
Julie?
Oh, yeah, yes, that's the chart that was made with the SCREE committee. Camelia did a wonderful chart. Oh, yeah.
I couldn't figure it out. Though.
I believe it's on the website as well.
Yeah.
It's a
All right.
wonderful interactive chart.
All right. Anything else for old business, new business?
Nope.
No. Julie?
No,
No. All right. So just to confirm, so our next meeting would be January 23rd. Yep, January 23rd, 7 p.m. So would you guys want to have a guest speaker? And if so, you know, what topic would you like addressed?
I think on the January meeting, since we're going to be updating the guide and we'll have this time to do it, maybe we should have that meeting to discuss how we're going to update it, who we're going to bring in to discuss what we need to add and
Okay.
what we need to eliminate. That's going to be time consuming. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds
I
good.
think because
Julie?
that will be time consuming. I
Right.
think so. That will be
Okay.
time consuming.
It was time consuming when we did it the first time, Julie, remember?
No, I know. That's why I said let's all take a couple of pages to cut this
Yeah.
down.
And also at that time, there were a lot more people on the committee. Remember?
Yes, yes, a lot more.
Okay. All right. All right. Yeah. So I guess that's that. Lee, Julie, you want to add anything before we adjourn? Nope.
Just
Right.
wish everyone a
Good.
happy holiday and see you at the next full board meeting.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
All right.
It was Alina and Winnie.
All right. So move to adjourn.
Thank
You
you.
have a second?
Thanks for the meeting. Very informative. Thank you.
Yep. Do you have a second to adjourn?
I second.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. You
Thank
have a
Happy
wonderful
holidays,
evening.
everyone.
Yep. Happy holidays. All right.
Take care. Good night.
Have a good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night and thank you.